All right, everyone. Okay, welcome to today's webinar. Um, and I'm going to be um, sharing my screen in a second, and you should be able to. We should get started in any minute now. All right. So this was a big week for a lot of people. It was a week of AWS reInvent, and I can't believe it's their 11th year already. Time flies. And in today's session, for those of you who could not make it in person, we just thought we'll give you a quick brain dump of some very interesting things that we announced. Of course, it's a massive event, so we can't cover everything that's possible. So we'll kind of go deep on containers and Kubernetes, right? So we'll kind of get going on that. So if you have any questions, you should be able to post a comment, and I have a colleague who will probably interrupt me in between and read out the question, and we'll try and take that on. We'll try and keep this as interactive as possible. Or if you have questions that are general Kubernetes related, feel free to ask that as well. It doesn't have to be just about reInvent. A little bit about me. So I'm Mohan Atreya, lead products and solutions at Rafe. We have very closely partnered with Amazon, and we have very deep type integrations with them. And we were there in full force at reInvent. It probably was one of the busiest events of the year. We'll kind of share some stats in a few minutes. So a little bit about the event itself. When I said it was crazy busy, I wasn't joking. There were nearly 50,000 in-person attendees that were reported out. And for those who could not make it in person, it looks like there were about 300,000 global attendees who were watching the streams and all of that. So a lot of people, crazy large event. And I mentioned this is the 11th reInvent conference. So pretty mature show. For the folks who registered, they had access to about 2,300 learning sessions. That's a lot, right? It's impossible to attend that many events. So as you can imagine, this is a very wide set of topics. And in today's session, we'll kind of cover one sliver of it, mostly focused on containers and Kubernetes. Okay, but before we do that, AWS also mentioned a few things all through the events, which I thought were really interesting. So I just thought we'll open the day with a little bit of trivia that you may or may not know. Let's start with that. Let's spend a few minutes on that. The first one is, we all know that there are many, many instance types. So if someone comes and asks you how many instance types are supported on AWS, I mean, your answer probably would be many. Well, what's the actual number? Can we get closer to a number? Is it 50? Is it 100? We learned at the keynote that apparently there are 600 plus instance types. So there's nobody who can memorize all these things. That's going to be an interesting problem for folks to figure out which instance type do I use for the kind of category or workload. That's going to be an interesting problem for somebody in the industry to solve. Maybe Amazon will solve it. The second piece of trivia that I personally found extremely fascinating is, I mean, all of us know there's a war that's been underway in Ukraine for pretty much all through the year now. And there's a Ukraine-based bank, a commercial bank, that apparently migrated everything from the data center. This includes apps and data. They moved lock, stock, and barrel. So this is like the epitome of lift and shift. They moved that to AWS Cloud in 45 days. Yeah. Everyone that thought that was impossible, well, someone has done it. It took a war to make that happen. And the name of the bank is, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce it right, is I guess, Private Bank or Private Bank. Not sure about the pronunciation. Anyway, fascinating statistic and trivia. So it is possible to do this in 45 days. I think there were many people who were projecting that this will take 2 years or 3 years. They pulled it off in 45 days. The other thing that I think is fascinating is, if you've been involved with Amazon, so I've been working with Amazon for about 10 years now. I think 2006 is when I first played with AWS, and then those were the early days, and then deep involvement happened later. They didn't have that many regions then. This has been like growing like crazy. See, if I ask you a question, how many regions does AWS have now? Most of us deal with one or two, right? Depending on the country you are in. They have 30 regions now, soon to be 35, right? This is crazy. Now, if you go and I'm going to flip to their global infrastructure page. So if you just search for AWS and global infrastructure, we kind of lay out a global map. And anything that's in green, so Northern California is kind of where I live, one of the oldest regions, that and US East, I guess, were the oldest. They have stuff coming in Western Canada soon. There's something coming in Israel. There's a second data center region coming in Australia. So if I'm a bank, for example, in Australia, I can keep my entire data in Australia. I don't have to have a DR site outside the country. So very interesting move by Amazon, more and more regions. And then, of course, there's one coming in Thailand as well. So interesting times where I guess people would ask the question, do I still need a data center when everything is available here? And another piece of trivia that was mentioned, which I thought was fascinating, and since I deal a lot with containers and Kubernetes, and a lot of our customers use Amazon EKS, so this was very, very interesting for me personally. The question is, what percentage of containers in the cloud run on Amazon? Is it 50%, 20%? Well, there are three big clouds, hyperscalers, right? You have AWS, you have Azure, and you have GCP, and they're all big dogs. So you kind of would assume that AWS, being mature, maybe has a little bit of a leg up. It seems to have a significant leg up. Apparently, when CNCF did a survey, more than 2/3 of all containers in the cloud run on AWS. That's fascinating. I was also a little surprised by this stat. Okay, so now let's move on to the actual updates that were done at reInvent. And again, for this section outside the trivia, which I hope was a good break for you from your regular day job, let's move on to the actual updates. And I'll kind of touch on some interesting things that I guess have long-term impact for customers and users. I'm not going to talk about some little things here and there that may not make a lot of sense long-term, right? So the first thing that everyone worries about and cares about is as they attempt to containerize their applications, they ask themselves the question, what is a good fit? Not just for EKS, but also for containers, right? And this answer is going to keep changing, right? Because number one, there are more facilities available from Amazon, and not just them, but also AWS partners like Rafi. We make this easier and easier for people to do this. So the kind of applications people are doing are modernizing legacy apps. People have a boatload of legacy apps, and a lot of people are, I guess, shutting down their data centers as quickly as possible. And they're using containers and Kubernetes as the means to migrate to Amazon EKS. That's a big one for people, right? And this is more of a survival game for these companies, because unless they do this, their core business might get eaten up. And if you've been watching AI, ML, that space quite a bit, And there's a lot happening right now in that space. There's actually a crazy amount of stuff happening in AI ML, especially if you've been watching OpenAI and seeing what they're doing with GPT-3 and possibly GPT-4 that's coming out. There's a crazy amount of work happening. This might be the next wave as AI disappears into our workflows. Well, these applications are being developed on Kubernetes, specifically on Amazon EKS, right? So fascinating to see how Kubernetes has become seminal for AI ML applications. Same thing with data processing. I have a dedicated slide on this. This data processing is a big one. And I have a specific slide just on that. And then, of course, the other two known devils, right? People build backends for applications and mobile apps, and then web applications, static and complex web apps. And this is kind of where the market started on Kubernetes. And as you can see, they're shifting into what I would call as complex use cases. And this one, we'll come back to this in a minute, because this has pretty big implications for what we believe will happen to the growth of Kubernetes and adoption of Kubernetes. The other big deal that we heard time and time again in not just the keynotes, but also customers and people who stop by the event at the show, the show floor, all of them seem to be struggling with cost management. And they're trying to solve three problems, seems like. They're trying to solve the problem of, Kubernetes is a shared, multi-tenant platform, right? So if you have 2-3 departments or teams sharing the same cluster, how do I allocate costs, right? And then in some cases, they can do a chargeback. In some cases, they can show back. So they can actually go and say, hey, business unit one, he's gonna charge you $1,000 a month. And they use that as a feedback loop for forecasting budgets and also eliminate wastage. Wastage can be a big deal in Kubernetes, because unless people do the right thing, you can have a lot of wastage on Kubernetes. And we'll have something to show you about this in a couple of minutes. Just hold that thought for a second. Now let's get into the interesting things that are happening on Kubernetes. This kind of piggybacks on certain capabilities of Kubernetes that are matured recently to a point where these are possible. So there are some use cases that only run for a certain time. Maybe they run at night, or maybe they run for X hours. Things like if I want to do drug discovery, I'm doing a lot of data crunching. If I'm training a machine learning model, I need to run that training for a certain amount of time, right? These are extremely well suited for what are called as batch jobs, right? Because they run and then they have to shut down. Well, guess what? In Kubernetes, there's something called jobs. There's also cron jobs. It seems like this is a marriage made in heaven. So if you're leveraging a service from Amazon called AWS Batch, and if you're working on any of these use cases, it turns out that Kubernetes and EKS are a great solution for this. And you'll see more and more from AWS here, trying to package all of these things up so that it's more and more turnkey for users, right, on EKS. So something really cool. Keep an eye on. There's going to be more here as we look ahead. The second thing is data on Amazon EKS. This is a little bit of an anti-pattern in some ways, right? Up to now, a lot of users on Kubernetes, like 5 years, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, they would avoid having data on Kubernetes, and they would use something like RDS or services outside EKS for data. That still is valid, but it looks like there's a lot of use cases emerging where people want to run data on Kubernetes, specifically EKS. So directionally, an interesting move, and I can see totally why, because People move to Kubernetes because they want the portability. They want to be able to move from one cloud to the data center, Amazon to data center, vice versa. So why would you want to not have data also inside Kubernetes so you can move at will when you want, right? And when and if you want. So what has it done for that? So if you go look up this URL that I'm talking about here, and if you look at that a little more, you'll notice that there are specific use cases for which they're creating solutions. And you'll see Rafi also supporting this on EKS to make this more and more turnkey with AWS. The first is like EMR on EKS, or you want to run Spark jobs on EKS. You can see a lot of these are to do with machine learning, right? Or for whatever reason, you want to run some open source databases on EKS, like Cassandra, etc. How do you do that, right? You want to make that super easy to use, and this is a lot of work happening where as these are available for users, it'll be fantastic where you can have everything self-contained in a Kubernetes cluster. You can just move your entire application and data from place to place, allowing extreme portability of your data. So looking forward to this particular thing in a big way in the next couple of years. Another thing they announced is what is called as EKS add-ons in the marketplace. And I'll kind of show this a little bit. I'll show a live demo also. So AWS has certain add-ons that are critical for the EKS cluster that they've supported as add-ons. And what they now have done is said, hey, we can also allow users to potentially try and also deploy certain third-party add-ons. And these could be open source, or it could be vendor commercial products. And in just a click, you can go and deploy it on an EKS cluster. So we've been working with them quite a bit. And as you can see, we have 2 projects that are coming soon in the marketplace. One is our open source Parallels offering for zero trust kubectl access. And the entire Rafi platform will be also available in the EKS marketplace for organizations that want to try and buy that way, right? So let's see a quick demo of what this looks like. So I'm logged in here into the AWS console, and let's go pick this cluster here. I'm just going to pick this particular cluster, and if you scroll down, you see this thing called add-ons, and if you go look at that, you get something called get more add-ons. You click on that one more time, and you notice here that there are some managed add-ons. These are like Amazon managed, Amazon provided, that you can deploy on these clusters if you want to. These are usually deployed by default, and you want to override them. You can do that with specific versions. Now, the thing they have launched is this one, this AWS Marketplace, right? So when you can go and find any of these entities and select that, and you're off to the races, right? So that's this is making it, I guess, easy for people to try things out. So that's a quick live demo of the Marketplace add-ons. Another thing that of course, a key thing to kind of remember here with the marketplace is these container images actually come from, they're hosted on ECR, right? So the advantage you have is these images are pre-scanned by AWS. They're available locally, so you don't have to go download them from a remote container registry. So they expect it to come up really fast, right? So great for trials and stuff like that. Now, of course, you got to factor in things like licensing, etc. For example, if you have a product that you want to click and install, that particular commercial product may require a license key or something like that. So you have to make sure that you use that process documented by the vendor. Otherwise, your services may not come up on that cluster. So that was an interesting move by the AWS team. This was announced at the reInvent. Another thing that I wanted to show you was we talked about cost management. Let's go back to that particular slide and talk about why this is a big deal. And what we'll do is we'll kind of look at look at this live on a particular cluster, EKS cluster, so you can relate to it. So here I'm logged into a particular environment, and I have an Amazon EKS cluster that happens to be provisioned by the Rapid platform. And why is cost management a big deal, right? So when I look at this cluster, if you notice here, I have a total of 6 cores, and 3.29 has been committed for something. And there are about 7 applications running on it, right? At this point of time, of course, CPU, memory, and storage, and all of that, right? All I get from this high-level view is I'm about 50%, a little over 50% utilized, right? Well, am I really being efficient? How do I know? Because in Kubernetes, one of the problems you have is you need to make sure that the resources that you request are actually the resources that you're using. So let's go look at this, right? So here, for example, I know that I'm running with a pretty low CPU utilization. I can probably pack more into this, right? I definitely have more capacity on this cluster than I'm using right now. But in Kubernetes, the worry you have is you may auto scale. You may need to add more. So you have to have some headroom in the process. So assume this is okay. So if you go back to this and let's go look at one of our pods, let's go look at this NP Empire, right? And if you look at this, the quality of service here is best effort, which means if I go look at the particular utilization, if you notice here, I haven't allocated. I've allocated a certain amount, but actual utilization is 0, right? So there's no activity here. So maybe I'm asking for too much, because when an application developer says my application has to work this way, they may be optimizing for a scenario that may not occur. And so it's really important to go back in and fine-tune your requests and limits for your pods so that you right-size your resource requests. And when you do that, and one way to achieve that is for hygiene. The other one is for cost, because you're spending money on infrastructure here. So how do you do that? And also, how do I know how do I allocate cost to this application or this application? How do I know which application is consuming what from a cost perspective? So cost is one click away. We've been working with AWS quite a bit to solve this problem. And it's one click away using the Rapid platform. And then here you can, for example, you can see the efficiency score is only 36%, which is not good, right? You want this to be much, much higher, which means it's a lot of wastage, right? So how do you remove the wastage? This requires the application developers to go back and tune their application, and you can also generate reports for them, right? So you can go generate reports, and for example, let's just generate right now, and here it's being generated. Let's pick up a report from before, and let's pull this down. It'll probably be a CSV file, and let's just open that for a second, and you will get a view into which resource is using how much, and how much is it costing. So you bear with me for a second while this opens using this. And for example, here I can go look at this resource is costing me X dollars, and the unallocated cost is so much. What do I do with it? I can go clean that up and optimize. So cost management, really big deal. Everyone should do something about it with our platform. And so that's one quick thing that I wanted to cover. Now, when you do cost management, it's also really important for you to think about organizationally how you'll implement this process, because you can, some companies have a model by which they can allocate costs back to cost centers, and that's how the budgeting happens. In some companies, the cost of the cluster is paid for from a central pool, and then they simply employ a showback approach. And as an organization, you got to think about which of these approaches will actually result in your desired outcome. As in, if you do a showback, it's possible that the downstream application teams might simply say, oh, thank you for showing me the data. I'm not going to do anything about it, right? There's nothing to lose for them, right? Versus a chargeback, because now there's skin in the game, that they may decide to go and optimize and make the effort to optimize, which is work for them. So as you implement cost management, think about that a little, and the right approach and the right process probably will make sense for you. Okay, so just to kind of recap all the stuff, we'll just run through this really quickly. People are building all kind of applications on Amazon EKS. It's not limited to just simple backend applications with REST APIs and web applications. People are building complex applications. They, in fact, even doing lift and shift first, and then modernizing their applications. Very big move. So this kind of means that EKS and Kubernetes are essentially mainstream right now, right? Cost management, big deal. If you're doing Amazon EKS, please think about this. You have solutions like Rafi that make this really easy for you, right? Look into that. And the other thing that you should look at is stuff is going outside EKS, right? They're taking EKS and using other services around Amazon to tie it together. Like you want to do batch processing using Amazon AWS batch. Now there's a solution for that, right? So becoming more and more mainstream. You want data on EKS, which you couldn't comprehend 3 years ago. Well, it's going mainstream. And you can run all kind of interesting workloads on EKS now. You also have a way by which you can deploy applications from either open source or commercial into your EKS clusters really quickly. And the final thing that I wanted to leave you with is if you want to try our platform, because I kind of showed you a little bit about the platform. You want to try this out and get the benefits of doing Kubernetes, especially EKS at scale, like many of our customers. You can try for free. Just go to rafi.co/start, and you should be able to do that in minutes and be off to the races in minutes. So just go to our Rafi website, click on Start for Free. You have a few things to fill out, and you'll have access in seconds, right? So I think that's all I had for today. Well, thank you for making it, and hopefully this was a very quick, compressed, impactful summary of all the interesting things related to Kubernetes and containers that happened at reInvent. And hopefully the trivia also was fun to hear. And if you have any questions, I'll have a quick look at the questions and see if people need answers right now. If not, we'll follow up through a different mechanism. And look forward to seeing you guys at the next session. Thank you.